And not just a place, but a time. Now that's the time. I think is a little harder than the place.
It's difficult.
Yeah, it's really a toughie to set aside because work, schedules, busyness. I mean,
you talk about that, the busyness. That's a huge thief of our time, and I battle that every day. With the alarm clock, or it's the.
So, how do you deal with busyness?
I think it just comes down to making choices. You have to choose. Like in the morning, I can over and over. I can choose to hit the snooze button, or I can choose God. And I don't know.
Let me ask you this: does it go back to even before the night before?
Yeah, planning.
Yeah,
that's
in other words,
big part, yeah.
Because your body requires so much sleep. Mine didn't get a whole bunch last night, by the way, but it does require so much sleep, and so you gotta start off and say, okay, what's more important, me meeting with the Lord or watching this movie?
Yeah,
right. And that I'm going to put it in plain terms, and maybe this is harder than it really is, but it boils down to do you love that movie more than you love Jesus? It's not quite that black and white, but I mean, I think you get my point, is that you have to make those choices, and because you love the Lord, you want to have that time to really get with Him. The meeting place, a place and a time. One of the things I talked about was purpose and priorities. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And I talked about, the purpose is to love God. And to love God, you got to spend time with Him. But then you have to establish priorities. And I think that's what we're talking about with the busyness.
Yeah.
We talked when we had our staff time, we talked a good bit about this concept that you brought up on the sovereignty of God meeting the will of man. Mm-hmm. Tell me what you thought about that and that whole concept. And you alluded to it there at the beginning of sharing about this, but what struck you about that?
Well, I just keep going back to all the Bible stories where God continually chose a human or a man to help in something that He was doing, whether it be Moses or Joshua, or ultimately the perfect man, which was Jesus. And I think God still has a desire to use us, to use us as He used Adam to name the animals. Mm-hmm. He wants us to help our families, and He wants us to usher Him into our family that way too.
It's someone said history is His story. Mm-hmm. And that's what history is. It's His story. I mean, ultimately He's in control and He's sovereign. However, the beautiful thing about God is that He loves us so much. You think about this, that He says, hey, I want you to participate with me in this great history that's being made. And so, I think I said in one of the chapters that the real history makers are those who've learned to pray. Mm. And the reason for that is history is His story. And you're participating with His story in your life, in your husband, wife's life, in your children's lives, in your brother, sister, your parents' lives. You're being shaped. We're being shaped. And when we agree with Him, and that's what prayer is coming into agreement with Him, then it releases great power, great power. What about you on that one, Jana? I know that you kind of alluded to it there.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking, I think in part of it you talk about how it doesn't take, God doesn't look at your degree, what you got, or your experiences, your qualifications. It just takes someone who's willing to make time and to meet with Him in that place and be obedient to that. And so I think that's part of it, is He has this great plan, but He needs us to agree with Him, be obedient to meeting with Him and saying, yes, God, I want you to work, and I will choose to follow you and to be obedient to what you're calling me to do.
When you first started talking about this, there was, and y'all forgive me here on this, but it reminded me, the first thought that came to my mind were some words that pierced through a man's heart some 500 years ago. And these words were, Die Gerechte wird aus Glauben leben, which means the just shall live by faith. And Martin Luther, that just captured his heart. The just shall live by faith. The just shall live by faith. And when I think about what we're talking about right now, is we live by faith in God, in His sovereignty, that He is good, that He is all powerful, that He is holy, and it's prayer is coming to that place of faith. It's coming, and when you read what Jesus said about prayer, He often used prayer and faith together. If you look in the Bible, and anything you ask in prayer, believing you shall receive, He says. So prayer and faith go hand in hand, and so there's that living by faith that comes as a result of having been with God. The more you see the goodness of God, the more faith you have. And that brings us to the next chapter that I wanted to ask you about, and that was patience and enduring and persevering in prayer. And we talked about the next chapter was actually praying for your family. And I think I started it by telling the story of my mother and how I prayed for over 20 years for my mother to come to Christ. And then one day she came to the Lord. What struggles do you have in just waiting on the Lord, waiting for His answer? When it doesn't happen when you think it ought to happen, or how do you struggle with that, or how do you deal with that?
Well, it's actually especially difficult for me because, all my life I've always been somewhat of a mover. Mm-hmm. Like, if I have an idea, I just put feet to it. And it's like when we started our arts festival, we organized it within a week, and we were already up and going. But sometimes what we think the timing should be is not always what God thinks the timing should be. And ultimately, it's His design, but He's not really going to tell us what exactly we want to know, exactly when we want to know it. He kind of like reveals it to us in pieces, and then even so with the timing of things.
Yeah, and there is a time. God has a timing. Mm-hmm. And this almost sounds contradictory to what we're talking about here, but mm-hmm. I heard a very, very secular interview with someone, I don't know, my guess is they probably didn't know the Lord, but I'm not going to judge that because that wasn't what it was about. But the person in talking about entertainment and the entertainment industry, and the person who was asking questions said, how do you choose a person that's really talented? I mean, how does a person make it big? And the person who was being interviewed made this statement. Said, there's a lot of talented people. And then she said, a lot of really talented people out there. And most of them never make it. And so the interviewer said, why? And she said, timing. Said, a lot of it has to do with timing.